Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the today's webinar. My name is Jyoti and I manage the Big Tech Software Donation Program at the NASCOM Foundation. I have Santosh More and Mahindra with me from the Big Tech team. We will start the session with little bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, and if you have any technical issues throughout the session, please type it in the chat box. And if you have any questions during the session, please put it in a Q&A box. If you are on a Wi-Fi connection and have a multiple programs open, this may sometimes affect the quality and the audio of the webinar. If possible, please close all the other programs to help you have the best experience. Please note the webinar will be recorded and will be available on the NASCOM Foundation YouTube page. Now I would like to hand it over to Mahindra.
Thanks, Jyoti. Good morning, everyone. This is Mahindra, and I would like to start off today's webinar, which is on the cybersecurity theme. So, can you go to the next slide, Jyoti, please? Yeah, so I would like to give a quick overview of about NASCOM Foundation. So NASCOM Foundation at a glance, we have founded in 2001, and NASCOM Foundation is India's only neutral not-for-profit entity representing tech industry. Our vision is basically leveraging technology to create an inclusive and progressive India. And some of the streams which we are focusing on is digital literacy, skilling and employability, women entrepreneurship. Moving on, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So talking about Big Tech, so far Big Tech has donated softwares worth 155 million across 1500 plus NGOs, which is actually impacting approximately 2.5 million people across India, which is a great milestone. And we have been, supporting the NGOs in, providing the right softwares which are required. And what we also do as software solutions, and we have as an offerings which cut across different verticals, are infrastructure, finance and accounting, marketing, donor management, security and backup, and operations. So, and talking about the NGOs, we have about 12,000 NGOs who have been registered on our Big Tech network. And moving on, I just wanted to quickly, highlight some of the donors who we have on Big Tech. So like Google Not-for-Profit, Quick Heal, Adobe, Bitdefender, AWS, just to name few of them. But you can always come and visit our website to know who are the other donors who are available, and by each vertical, which I also explained, right? So you can also find all the donors listed there with the software donations which they offer, right? And moving on to today's webinar, I just wanted to, give like quick overview about, cyber attackers, right, are on a rise and can target any device in your organization. As a result, cybersecurity must be faster, smarter, and more dependable than ever before, right? So this webinar will help you protect your organization from common malware attacks, set up a strong cybersecurity strategy for your organization, and identify solutions to help minimize cyber attack risk, right? So please join me in welcoming our speaker for the day, Aditya Bhatia. So to just give you a quick introduction about Aditya, Aditya has been working as a senior consultant technical team of Data Security of India. He has over 6 years of experience in cybersecurity and data privacy, and he holds an MBA from IIT Delhi and a BTech in electronics and communications. So over to you, Aditya. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks, Mahindra. I would like to share the screen. So if you could stop presenting, I will take over. Yeah, thank you so much. Are you able to view my screen?
Yeah, we can see the screen.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mahindra. Thank you so much, Jyoti, for setting the context and for the opportunity. So before I get started on the session, so just a bit about what DSCI does. So DSCI is a sister concern of NASCOM and also NASCOM Foundation, and we are a focal body on security and data privacy. So while we were conceptualizing the session, we thought of keeping the two tracks of security and privacy as distinct, because although there are some commonalities between the two issues, which concern each one of us, given the fact that we are virtually, extremely connected to the various aspects of the digital space, or what we like to call as cyberspace. So today's session would be focused on the security part of it, although there would be slight mention of privacy or some of the commonalities security shares with privacy. But by and large, in the next 30 minutes or so, I'll try to accomplish two objectives. One is to familiarize you all with some of the key trends. And when I say trends, some of the common risks, vulnerabilities, and threats and attacks that are going on in the space of cybersecurity, and what kind of impact it has been having for various organizations. I'll also try to contextualize it for how it's working out for the nonprofits. And towards the end, I'll shed some light on some of the baseline security that organizations are required to have, and probably they should start, if they haven't already, they should start focusing on those aspects, right? So that's why I've just titled the session as the imperatives for nonprofits, and how do you actually go about becoming a little more proactive when it comes to implementing cybersecurity, or even becoming aware that cybersecurity should be on your priority list if it's not already. Right. So this diagram basically captures, the tag cloud captures some of the key threats which I wanted to talk about. And this is something which concerns the businesses, the society, and of course, let's not forget the important part, which is the individual, and let's say the employees in case of nonprofits, right? So some of the attacks, for example, phishing, data leakage, espionage, intrusion. So bear with me on the technical jargon. I'll try to keep it at the minimal, but I'll also keep on explaining what these mean. Of course, you must have all heard about ransomware. So, ransomware is something which is perhaps the most vicious, of all the cybersecurity threats which are posed by cyber criminals. And the major challenge with the ransomware is that, its intent is to hold the business systems hostage for the purpose of extorting money from victims, right? And if you have been following the tabloids, if you have been staying current on the happenings with regard to cybersecurity, so organizations have ended up paying tens of millions of dollars or rupees, whatever you want to call it, while getting back access to their systems which were held ransom by the cyber attackers or the malicious elements, right? So it's very simple that even a ransomware attack begins with an on-screen notification that data on your network has been encrypted and you can no longer access that particular data. And the problem is it remains inaccessible until that ransom has been paid, right? So I'll be talking about ransomware a little more in the consecutive slides. I just wanted to pick up some of the pieces. So denial of service, if you look at the top, I've mentioned. So a denial of service attack takes place when the criminals attempt to disrupt the normal traffic on your network, right, or to a server or to a system. And how this is done? This is typically done by overwhelming the infrastructure of your organization with a flood of traffic, right? So just if you were to understand for the sake of simplicity, think of it like probably a traffic jam which is clogging up the highway and preventing normal traffic from arriving at its destination. So just an analogy to make you understand denial of service. So in the interest of time, I won't be talking about each one of these, but some of these, for example, the phishing, the ransomware, denial of service, these I'll be talking about, or probably the bottom, I would be talking about a bit in detail, and of course, the financial fraud, right? One more piece which I want to talk about when it comes to the key cyber threats or attacks, of course, the malware. So malware is nothing but short for malicious software, right? Which is a code which is developed by cyber criminals to gain unauthorized access to a network, right? So this is the key, irrespective of the kind of attack that we are talking, the kind of risk or the vulnerability to your IT infrastructure or to your systems we are talking. So at the end of the day, the intent of the attacker is to gain unauthorized access to your network and to cause some sort of damage to your systems or to your data, right? The data, of course, we are talking about the personal data, the personally identifiable data, or the sensitive data that you might be holding, that you might be custodians of, by virtue of your systems, right? So I've talked about ransomware, malware, denial of service, just to give you a flavor of what kind of different attacks are being perpetrated nowadays, right? So moving on, so I have collated some of the statistics, which might help you appreciate the kind of impact these different cyber attacks have been having, right, on organizations. So in the first half of 2021, the attacks or cyber attacks on organizations across the world jumped 29%, right, which is a very substantive jump. And 95% of the malware, it is said, was delivered via email. So when I talk about phishing later, when I talk about what are the various different scenarios, so that you're able to appreciate how phishing is actually caused, right? So phishing attacks account for more than 80% of reported security incidents. Even if you look at some of the sophisticated attacks that impacted, several organizations across the world, so phishing was found to be a major driver, or kind of a major centerpiece for that particular attack to be perpetrated, right? And approximately $17,700 is lost every minute due to phishing attacks. So although the impact of a cyber attack, we should all appreciate, is not only in monetary terms, it goes way beyond that, the reputational impact and other kind of impacts it has on your stakeholders, or the trust that you have established with your stakeholders, with your donors, with your partners, the third parties. So somewhere that also gets disrupted. Sometimes the extent of disruption could, of course, vary drastically depending on the nature of the attack and for how long the attack has been, in place. So in 2020, ransomware was involved in 21% of the reported breaches. And mind you, not all the attacks, not all the data breaches get reported, of course, because organizations are wary of the reputation, are wary of the trust factor. So, but whichever incidents were reported, so ransomware was involved in 21% of reported breaches. Hence, it's important for you to understand, or probably dig a little deep into what ransomware entails. I've talked about what ransomware is all about, how the definition part of it, but the kind of impact it has, I'll try to elaborate a bit more. And between 2019 and 20, the attacks rose, the ransomware attacks only. I'm not even touching upon the other type of attacks. They rose by 62% worldwide, right? And as I mentioned, people ended up paying, tens of hundreds of dollars, millions of dollars to the attackers, right? So the pay increased by 311% over 2019. One attack which I can, which comes to my mind and which some of you might have heard, is the Colonial Pipeline attack. So this was an attack on a US company that was handling the, oil supply to a major part of the country. Their infrastructure got attacked. It was a ransomware attack, right? And the whole oil supply was, brought to a grinding halt. And organization, I think, had to pay $5 million in ransom. And it was, if I'm not wrong, it did involve a phishing element. And when I say phishing, so in very simplified terms, one of the employees or somebody ended up clicking a link or downloading an attachment that they weren't supposed to, or maybe a malicious link, a malicious attachment that came via your email, right? So I'm not saying that was the only factor involved in the Colonial Pipeline attack. It had several other implications also, which I won't be, delving into. But yes, phishing is something which is kind of a attack that entails social engineering. So social engineering is basically a concept when somebody is using manipulation, is using deceit, or is trying to defraud you, and trying to gain access to your credentials, trying to gain access to your data, to your network. So social engineering is kind of the bedrock of all these kinds of attacks. Phishing is one of them, right? So if I were to talk about, the security considerations for nonprofits, so some of the important, the kind of sensitive information that nonprofit organizations have, and if that is exposed because of a data breach, that could have some damaging impact, whether it's some information I've tried to list. Of course, this is not exhaustive, but this is just an indicative list of what are the kind of important personal or what are the kind of important sensitive information that you might be holding. The donation forms, the research surveys, the meeting records, the donor contact information, including the name, email addresses, home addresses, the mailing list, and of course the sensitive and personally identifiable information of the beneficiaries. It could be background information, medical history, etc. So the reason for incorporating this slide is to let you know that the data that you are custodians of. So although this aspect gets covered a little more detail when we talk about privacy, but from a security standpoint, even if you look at the various legislations, the regulations that are applicable to a particular law of the land, in this case India. So say, for example, once the personal data protection bill comes into force, or the existing IT Act. So all these legislations and regulations, and I'm not just talking about India, across the world. If let's say some of you, hypothetically speaking, are operating in a geography like a US or a European Union. So just a hypothetical example. So the point is, these regulations have clear expectations from you and the obligations they put on you in terms of having those minimal baseline security or having those reasonable security safeguards. Let's say they expect you, if you are holding all this data, so then you must have deployed reasonable controls in order to safeguard those kind of data or the kind of data which I've listed, right? And of course, we do appreciate the resource constraint that might be there on part of some of you. And, of course, whether it's in terms of deploying a dedicated team from an IT standpoint, from a security standpoint, or having those, technical controls. When I say technical controls, there are various different types of, cybersecurity controls, which probably you need to familiarize yourself. They could be physical in nature, administrative, technical controls, procedural controls. But say, for example, the technical controls, some of the solutions that you may have deployed or probably you need to deploy in order to safeguard the traffic coming on your network, in order to safeguard your web servers, in order to safeguard your mobile applications or various applications that you might be having. So that's very, very important for you to understand and appreciate, this particular aspect. Yes, so I've tried to collate some of the key reasons, that occur to me. What are the major, drivers or factors for the rising cyber threats? So low cyber awareness is definitely probably the reason that we are, talking in the first place today. The awareness on the, on the part of organization per se. Although, in the past, also I've interacted with some of the non-profits, and when I got a sense of the kind of awareness they had towards the cybersecurity threats, the vulnerabilities, and some of the measures that they had undertaken in order to counter those threats, right? So I was pleasantly surprised to note that at least 40 to 50% of the non-profits were aware of the pressing cyber threats, whether it's the ransomware, the malware, or the attacks on their network, or maybe the insider threats, which I'll be talking about shortly. So those, I think, become very, very important for you to understand in order to even get started. Because a lot of times, or a lot of questions that came my way during that conversation was, how do I get started? Because I have very, very minimal resources. So of course, there is no easy answer to it, and it's certainly not a binary one. But of course, we can definitely get started by deploying some reasonable minimal controls, which are not exactly resource intensive, but at least having the right set of procedures, having the right set of access controls enabled in your organization, having the right set of privileges being given to your employees, not having those undue privileges. So I'll be talking about all this. So one aspect which I missed in the initial slide was the insider threat, which I would like to talk about. So insider threat typically occurs, when someone close to an organization with authorized access, that person ends up misusing that access to compromise the company's data or critical systems, right? Insiders do not have to be necessarily the employees. They can also pose as, partners or third-party vendors or contractors. So insider threat becomes a little more difficult to deal with because, the aspect of insider threat basically begins with humans and not the systems. So that is something which I wanted to specifically talk about inside the threats, apart from ransomware, malware, and the denial of service attacks, right? So low cyber awareness is, of course, one of the important reasons. Inadequate budget, I've already talked about the resource constraints, because a lot of times, when it comes to non-profits, they may not have a dedicated, IT team or dedicated security team who might be, on the lookout for all those attempts or intrusions that might be happening on your network, on your data. So that is one of the challenges, and of course, which kind of acts as or makes the non-profits probably a little more lucrative target when it comes to cyber attacks. Of course, poor cyber security controls. So I think it's very, very important for you to get a sense, as the leaders of the organization, to get a sense of what kind of identity and access management, what kind of authentication, what kind of controls apart from this, when it comes to network security, when it comes to email security, when it comes to in the pandemic, we have all transitioned to remote working. So remote working brought with itself in its own set of challenges. When you're trying to connect to your corporate network via a virtual private network or via other remote working enabling infrastructure, that infrastructure itself became a target of several kind of cyber attacks and vulnerabilities and risks, right? I've already talked about in the previous slide the impact ransomware is having. I've also tried to share some of the statistics around it. So the increased dependency on technology, it's not that pre-pandemic these attacks didn't used to exist. The attacks used to exist already, but just that the increased dependency during the pandemic was just an additional push, if you will, to that dependency, and hence the rising threats and ransomware. Of course, let's not forget the frauds part of it. The financial frauds that were perpetrated in the name of donations, and several kind of scams or charities which were kind of made up and running by the malicious actors, and a lot of people ended up falling prey to that, right? Also, our presence on social media, us having our own devices which we use to access our network, the mobile devices, it could be the smartphones, the tablets, other kind of mobile devices, in addition to laptops, of course. So this has increased the attack surface, so to speak. So when I say attack surface, so it essentially means what are the various possible route of that could serve as an entry for the attacker. They are looking for that chink in the armor so that they can kind of somehow intrude or infiltrate the infrastructure, and then kind of reach to the crown jewels of your IT infrastructure, right? So these are some of the factors that have aggravated the cyber threat, so to speak. Right. So this is kind of, think of it as a continuation to my slide on ransomware, which captured the statistics. Right. So when I say what are the implications and why all of you should be bothering yourself with cybersecurity as a concern, right? So it's not just the financial losses, which I've already talked about in the previous slides. It's also the loss of productivity. Because if you look at how these attackers, the motivations and the considerations that they have been having nowadays, so they have sometimes, what we have seen is they're not just after the money. It's not because, all the organizations that are cash rich are the recipient of it, even to disrupt their operations, to discontinue their operations, disrupt their services, right? So that is yet another kind of a motivation for attackers. Of course, probably they are attacking with the objective of damaging your reputation. I've already talked about it, the trust part of it. Because let's say when you have, because digitization is something which is inevitable in order to sustain, even as a non-profit or even as an organization which has, so many partners, so many donors, so many stakeholders who they interact with, so many third-party vendors. You can't really afford to stay away from digitization. So that is something of a given. The extent of digitization, of course, might vary across organizations, but they have, the digital presence is significant nowadays, right? So you have to have that consideration, the parallel consideration of a secure and safe digitization as we speak about. So this whole session has been conceptualized only with that intent, right? In case that awareness or that cognizance of that where is missing, probably this session could help you take there, right? Of course, the legal part of it, that you have to, because there is no alternative to compliance with the regulations and the legislations. And even if you look at the IT Act, so IT Act, I think in 2011 came out with the reasonable security practices, that these are the bare minimum controls organizations need to deploy in order to safeguard the personal and sensitive data that they might be holding, right? And of course, continuity of services, business continuity and disaster recoveries, yet another ramification from a cyber standpoint. So you see, there's a whole spectrum of ramification when it comes to a cyber attack. It's not just the money part. Money part is, of course, blows a heavy dent to the organization. But apart from it, there are several other, probably more, far-reaching ramifications that I've tried to capture in this slide. Of course, we have already talked about numbers, so there's no point. You can, go through these numbers yourself, pretty much self-explanatory. But irrespective of, the sector which you might be operating in, you could be operating in, probably healthcare or different sectors. All the sectors, none of them are kind of, what we have observed, and also by virtue of interaction with several OEMs and, what they have been observing in terms of who are the recipients of these cyber attacks. So I think it has been across the board. So that is the message which I wanted to drive via the section at the bottom, the sectoral view of it, right? So yes, phishing is something which I should be talking about a little more, because phishing has been, labeled as the most common cause of ransomware attacks. The phishing emails, if you look at the percentage distribution, so phishing email tops the chart with 54% as the leading cause of ransomware attacks reported by, MSPs in 2020. Of course, poor user practices, lack of cybersecurity training, weak passwords, malicious websites, user credentials, clickbait, of course. So all these percentages are only mentioned here with the view to, drive home the message that phishing is something that you and your organization and employees need to be aware of. So that's why I've talked about some of the scenarios that, you may have already encountered as an individual, because of course you are working as an employee for a non-profit or for any organization, but at the end of the day, you yourself as an individual are also sometimes targeted. So you may have seen various kinds of attempts, whether it is kind of, email forms creating some sort of urgency that you need to transfer money ASAP, otherwise you will have to suffer some sort of consequences, XYZ, right? Or maybe a lottery win, or maybe, generic emails that come your way, addressing, maybe not having direct contact information in the signature block, suspicious sender address, that is trying to imitate a legitimate address, right? Spoofed hyperlinks and the spoofed websites, right? Suspicious attachments. Sometimes, you don't even know what is the origin of these emails, what is the origin of this attachment. So and of course, let's not forget that phishing is not just limited to people who are leveraging desktops or laptops. It is also on the rise on mobile devices. So please don't be under the impression that it's only the networks or the laptops, the laptops or the desktops which are targeted for phishing. Also the mobile devices, and which is SMS spoofing is one of the pertinent example for mobile-based phishing, right? So the only idea to paint these scenarios is to let you know that, let's say, next time you end up uh, interfacing or coming across such an email which has some sort of suspicious element, whether it's the attachment, whether it is the sender address, whether it is the way they have addressed you, whether it is the content part of it, they are trying to create some sort of urgency, because it doesn't really take a lot of time in order to cross check and probably thinking a little bit before actually clicking a link in the email or before downloading an attachment. So always try to make an attempt to probably double check and then end up downloading anything. So phishing, if I were to move to my previous slide, so phishing emails in a lot of cyber attacks and a lot of data breaches, phishing emails have been touted as one of the leading causes or kind of, the point of origination of even a very sophisticated cyber attack, right? So that's why it's important for you as an organization to train your employees, who, of course, everybody has access to the email, the, organizational email. So it's important for them to have that sense and cognizance, and that will only come if they are kind of, they are subject to some sort of simulation exercise. I'm not asking you to conduct a very sophisticated mock drill, but of course, a tabletop exercise is something which you might consider, or even if, sharing some of the scenarios with them, or kind of a guide or a rule book. Not a very heavy, intensive thing I'm asking you to do, but just that familiarizing them of the different ways in which phishing can be, perpetrated. I have, tried to talk about some of the important controls that, which organizations, which non-profits can, deploy in order to counter some of the threats, some of the attacks which I just talked about. So, before I even go to some of the technical controls that I've listed here. So what I believe is a comprehensive policy probably can, play a key role in ensuring that the potential cyber risks are identified. Because it all begins with, probably carrying out a risk assessment of your organization, of your enterprise, and then being aware of these are the potential cyber security risks that your organization might be subject to, because that is step one. Of course, in addition to it, you have to make arrangements to address the physical security risks. Even as fundamental and as petty as leaving a computer unlocked or passwords written on sticky notes. I've seen that, and I'm pretty sure some of you may have already experienced it. It can be a huge threat. Sounds very, very trivial, but it can have those long-lasting implications which I talked about. Of course, some of the non-profits which I'm aware have also come out with or have tried to develop their own best practices for working from home. So, when the lockdown took place or took effect, so we also talked to a lot of organizations, and we came up with some of the best practices, not just for large-scale organizations, but for small and medium businesses, for not specifically for non-profits, but the small and medium businesses. I think some of the practices could be directly adopted from that, right? Another aspect is, of course, password management. So setting up strong passwords is fundamental, but most importantly, if you look at the authentication piece, which I've talked about, allowing remote access to the organization's internal network strictly with multi-factor authentication. So multi-factor authentication is nothing but, let's say you have provided not just one layer where the password is being asked, probably you add an OTP based layer or some additional layer or some additional factor that you ask a user before you give him or her access to the internal network or internal corporate resources, right? So multi-factor authentication is something which I would like to emphasize, or maybe for you, for those of you who may not be aware, just probably some sort of a takeaway for that, right? User access management is something which I would like to talk about very briefly. So what happens is that, most software programs allow administrators to customize end user access and control the permission levels based on the roles. But you always have to keep in mind that you have to apply the principle of least privilege, or the principle of least privilege depending on the employee's role. Only the access should be granted. Let's say employees playing role of maybe an administrator or maybe some other role, but they are being granted privileges or accesses which don't really serve the purpose for them, or which are not really commensurate with their role. That kind of becomes a big source of vulnerability for you all, right? Also, you need to closely monitor all the privileged users or all the administrators of critical accounts. That monitoring would be very, very important, right? And just make sure that when I talked about the type of controls, when I talked about the procedural controls, so you have to make sure that all the decisions that you're taking should also be documented. And documentation is only one part of it. Another very, very crucial part of it is frequently reviewing those, because in when it comes to security and also when it comes to privacy, you cannot afford to be static and stagnant in your approach. You have to make it a very dynamic, and you have to frequently review. Why is that? To ensure relevance. Simple. Especially we have talked about identity. Let's say an employee in your organization transitions or moves out of your organization. In that scenario, have you taken adequate steps to make sure that the identity or the privileges are revoked because the particular employee is no longer associated with the organization? So all these small aspects uh, you know need to be taken care of. I've also tried to list, apart from backup, of course, you need to make sure that there you have made adequate provision for backup of all your configurations, all your network systems, databases, user identity and access data. Because backup, I'm not saying it's a one-stop solution, but it certainly comes in handy in some of the scenarios. Also, some of the technical controls which I've tried to talk about, and which I would like to spend 5 minutes on it. Monitoring your network traffic. Of course, some of the tools, this whole session that has been conceptualized. So we are also talking about some of the software tools and licenses, which have been donated by the donors to the non-profits. So apart from the antivirus and anti-malware solutions, which are deployed heavily across organizations, it's important to have all those best practices when it comes to monitoring your network traffic, making sure that the hardware and the software are updated, right? And you're not using any sort of legacy system, or you're not using any sort of unpatched systems, because they can be a source of a great vulnerability, unpatched devices and unpatched applications, right? So very simple. If I were to sum it up, I've tried to enumerate some of the best practices, whether it's in terms of network and software, portable media, password security. So all these best practices are basically, if I were to simplify it, so you have to ensure that the antivirus, the malware and firewall software is in place. And again, I'm not saying, by no means I'm saying that these are exhaustive in scope and nature, because in limited time I can only cover so much. So you have to make sure that security patches are up to date, and you have a means of backing up data, which I've talked about. Ensuring that the mobile software is updated regularly to keep the mobile devices secure, right? Always you have to use an email provider that offers SSL. So what is SSL? SSL is nothing but secure socket pair, right? Uh, of course, that training needs to be imparted to the employees and volunteers and the stakeholders to never, deploy unknown portable devices or USBs, as they can be a potential carrier of malware, right? Of course, using a password protected virtual private network when connecting to the public Wi-Fi networks, because a lot of times what we do, so the Wi-Fi security I've talked about in my next slide, but we have a tendency to connect to the open and unsecure Wi-Fi, which can cost us dearly, right? So that is something which you need to avoid. So some of the things which I've talked about, so these are aimed at achieving greater resiliency, right? Whether it is, if you look at the third part of it, the software and the asset security. So you should have a significant focus on what software can be installed and what software cannot be installed, right? Of course, employees should be kind of made aware, and they should refrain from avoiding or installing all those plugins or freewares or other unapproved software, any software which hasn't been approved by the IT. So there should be a kind of a gradual building up of culture wherein you inculcate in that particular best practice in your employees, where they have to avoid installing kind of games and other things. Of course, performing a full scan of the hard drive, the pen drive, and other portable media that you use. So that's very, very important. Password is something which I've already talked about. Two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication I've talked about. But frequently changing them and setting passwords which could be a combination of alphanumeric and special characters. So that is something which all of us should get used to in case you aren't already. So I am operating under the assumption the only reason is uh, to reiterate the best practices, to reiterate those minimum safeguards that you can deploy. And this is only kind of an initial level of security that you are creating. There is much more to it, which I can probably share some material in the literature for your benefit offline. But this is something which I primarily wanted to talk about. Privacy is something which I am deliberately not, venturing into because, down the line we may deliberate on privacy specifically. Right, email security is very, very important when it comes from the standpoint of non-profits. It's very, very important for you, to not fall prey to it, right? Where any form of, as I've already talked about eloquently at length, that emails, phishing emails are a great source of attacks and especially the ransomware attacks. So you better be wary of that. Social engineering, I've talked about. Phishing, I've talked about. Some of the scenarios I've talked about, email security, privacy protection. And of course, even also, in our day-to-day life, if you are, let's say, visiting a website, so better make sure that they are trusted websites and probably check for the HTTPS symbol, right? And check for the lock sign. And of course, avoid, refrain from using or saving your password or enabling unnecessary, undue, illegitimate permissions to various apps that might be requesting permissions. So we have a tendency to, sometimes ignore those aspects in the interest of convenience. And sometimes that is understandable also because there is a pressing requirement, but it cannot always be the case, right? So what I wanted to, end my talk with was that how do you actually, begin? That's what I talked about initially also. How do you actually go about achieving that resilience in your systems, in your businesses? So the step one is, of course, develop an understanding of the risks, cybersecurity risks, which are confronting the organization. And these risks could be to your systems, could be to your assets, could be to your data, and also the capabilities. The reason I'm, emphasizing on identification of cybersecurity risk and doing kind of a adopting a risk management approach is that this will help you to better manage those risks, right? And the efforts or the controls, the various kind of measures that you undertake, then would be consistent. Very simple, would be consistent with your risk management strategy, correct? And also, most importantly, the business needs, because that is something which none of us can afford to ignore, right? This is NIST is an organization of USS's United States Department of Commerce, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they come up with, they are very prolific when it comes to frameworks, when it comes to standards. So they have come up with a risk management framework, which is, widely referenced by organizations across the world. So whether it's, categorizing, selecting, implementing, assessing, authorizing, and monitoring. So this is nothing, these are not technical terms, these are the various phases or stages which you can adopt as part of, let's say, risk management approach, right? So what I would urge you all is, I would, stop talking here because I apparently have run out of time. So I would urge us to go through this NIST risk management framework. I can share more details around it offline so that you can at least get started and make a sense of how do you go about developing or establishing a cybersecurity governance structure, through development of policies, procedures, and processes to manage the cybersecurity risks which you have identified earlier, right? So this is what my presentation is all about. Mahendra and Jyoti, I would like to stop at this time and see if we want to take up any questions at this point of time.
Well, thanks a lot, Aditya. It was a very informative session, and I feel that it covered a lot of things from a metrics perspective, the importance perspective. So I would just take a minute to, route what the current big tech softwares which are available for cybersecurity, right? And post that, I would just kind of open up with the Q&A session. because we have a good chunk of questions which are coming up in the Q&A box. So yeah, so basically what I wanted to cover here is there are a lot of things which Aditya has covered in terms of what can be an issue and how the NGOs can avoid that, right? What are the potential risks which an NGO can face, right? So these are some of the softwares which are available on big tech, like the Quick Heal, right? Antivirus, which can protect you from all the viruses, and we have Norton and also Bitdefender for the antivirus for Mac. So these are some of the softwares which are available where you can just go ahead, and this comes at a very administrative cost, because this comes as a donation from the donor. So I would kind of urge the NGOs to kind of come up and utilize these things which are available at Big Tech platform. And I would like to kind of open the platform, session for the Q&A. So Jyoti, over to you, where you can kind of talk about what questions we have, and Aditya, you can kind of take the questions up and see how we can address those from NGOs.
Yeah, thank you, Mahindra. So, Aditya, we have a couple of questions for you. So, I will take it one by one. So, one of the NGO wants to know that how can we identify the malware emails and ensure we do not receive those.
Right. So I think that's an interesting question. But if you refer to my initial slides where I'm saying that email tends to be an important carrier or important route of malware delivery, right? So it's that, let's say, if a sender's address is wrong and suspicious, probably that could be identified as the first red flag. So, say for example, sometimes it's just one letter, that makes the difference in what should be. I'll just take one example of example at chase.com becomes example at CHAASE. So you can see they have inserted one additional A, which is not easily perceptible to people who might be, overlooking that small detail, right? So a sender's address either is wrong or suspicious. Some sort of tweaking has been done with it is the first red flag, right? And also, the use of malicious links is one of the main characteristics of a malicious email, what you are referring to. So, of course, try or always refrain from, clicking on a link or call to action. Sometimes they have that call to action button embedded in that email. So that is another cue for you to not click it, right? And as I've mentioned, when it comes to email, another important facet of a malicious email is a malicious attachment, because sometimes those malicious attachments can be even more dangerous, right? And also the spelling and the grammatical errors can indicate frauds in the emails when it comes to this. And so these are different, again, scenarios that you can try to be on the lookout for. Let's say next time you get an email from an unknown sender, you will take that pain of probably looking at the email address of the sender, trying to identify the subject line, probably trying to look at the attachment, and also the body of the email per se, having some sort of urgent call to action. Because, of course, sometimes legitimate mails can be urgent, but how do you actually draw that distinction? Because it doesn't take very long to do that due diligence, to do that double checking, right? And also another important cue is you need to pay attention to how people write. Sometimes, again, this is not a technical aspect. This is more of a behavioral aspect, which is very, very important when it comes to, tricking people via malicious emails or via, duping them via those malicious emails. Accounts can be hacked and signatures can be mimicked. Simple. So malicious emails of business email compromise. So yes, another term which you need to be familiar with is business email compromise in this regard. I'll just share some literature around it that will make you understand the business emails. If they are compromised, what are the implications? What are the various different scenarios? So yes, this is how I would sum it up. Some of the ways which you can identify, of course, not the exhaustive list, but some of the important or commonly perpetuated means of delivering a malicious email.
So, since we are running short of time, I will take one or two more questions.
Sure.
So, one of the questions is, what are the primary steps to avoid these kind of challenges for those who are not having a sound knowledge of a technical terms or a cyber control? What are the common steps to be followed by the NGO leaders or the partners?
Right. So again, as I mentioned in the beginning, when I interacted with some of the non-profits earlier, when I was talking to them on security as well as privacy, so this question came that, let's say, the constraints could be on the resource front, constraints could be on the awareness front. So I'm assuming that, let's say, when I've given you the cue of a risk management framework, that could be a good start for you to probably, conduct a risk assessment exercise for your organization, just to get a sense of what kind of attacks you might already be subjected to, what kind of risks that you're having. Let's say one very, very specific example: you are engaging with a lot of third parties, you are onboarding a lot of vendors, a lot of contractors. So the third party risk in itself is a good starting point. Start by identifying when you are, getting into business, when you're entering into a contract with the third party. Have you incorporated those specific clauses with respect to security and privacy? And yes, if I were to answer the knowledge part of it, so some of the important frameworks, some of the important standards, there's an ISO standard by the name of ISO 27001. Again, it is a very, very detailed and technical standard, and you would want, or you may want to explore the possibility of deploying a person or dedicated resource who can go through the compliance requirements for your organization, who can probably help you carry out some sort of a risk assessment for your organization, who can probably do this very task of, the question which you raised. If we are not exactly aware of the technical jargon, how do we get started? So the plain and simple submission from my end is, get started by referring to some of the important frameworks and standards, and probably figuring out a way. Of course, it is not a one-day job. You will need to invest some sort of time, some sort of resources into it, in order to get a sense of your risk landscape. I think that's how I would like to put it. Of course, we can discuss further.
Sure. We will take one live question from Naresh. Hi Naresh, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
I can see his hand raised, but I think
Yeah.
he needs to unmute himself.
Okay, should we go
Hello.
Yeah.
Sorry, am I audible, sir?
Yeah, you are audible. Please go ahead.
So, Aditya, as you started your statement or idea about poor cyber security, so you want to enhance by skills and tools. So, my question is, in the existence of social engineering that you have mentioned in your statement, how would you like to justify the cyber security in this case? Suppose, let's take a scenario in your company where you work. So you made a file log, something kind of file that provide a script when you create backend data. So in this case, someone who deployed in your company to check it out, or as an engineer to maintain your security and technical problems. So in this case, if I bribed him, so how can you justify in this case cybersecurity? Thanks. This is my question.
So Naresh, if I understand your question correctly, are you referring to, let's say, one of the employees, or might who has
Social engineering?
right?
Let's leave off the scenario. Just take out that in the existence of social engineering, how would you like to justify the social engineering cyber security? Sorry.
Okay, so Naresh, let's say if you talk about social engineering, so there are two aspects to it. One is that social engineering, which is perpetrated from an external source, right? what we call as the external driver of cybersecurity, and one is probably the insider threat, which I was referring to earlier. Let's say an employee trying to carry out social engineering on another employee and trying to get access to some sort of your credentials or to a system. So again, you have to look at it from both the standpoints. In the external social engineering, when somebody is trying to defraud you, deceive you in order to gain access to your network, in order to gain access to the resources, that is something which gets taken care of partially by, of course, carrying out those simulations and mock drills, wherein you, as let's say an NGO leader, you acquaint your employees that these are the scenarios in which the external forces will try to carry out or execute social engineering. So if they are already acquainted with those scenarios, probably they have a heads up in terms of how to deal with those scenarios. Now, if I were to talk about the internal driver or the insider threat, let's say insider threats is a little more stealthy in nature, if you will, and also a little more hard to detect, also from a social engineering standpoint, because attributing a cyber attack or probably tracing the source of how a cyber attack actually began, that is one of the, what should I say, an important and a kind of a formidable problem for every organization, not just non-profits. So social engineering from an internal standpoint needs to be dealt with by having those robust procedures and kind of procedural and administrative controls, wherein carrying out social engineering in the first place becomes so much difficult that you don't have to deal with it. So from an insider standpoint, what I'm trying to say is prevention is better than cure. So that's how I would like to put it. I'm not sure if I answered your question fully, but social engineering can be looked at from these two standpoints: internal drivers and external drivers.
Thank you, Aditya, for answering Naresh's question. Now we would like to introduce the team to Saksham, who is from our Connect for Good team, who will be presenting a small demo on the manager application and how NGOs can be benefited by using the application. Saksham, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jyoti. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's good afternoon. So quickly, I'll take you to the manager platform. And before taking you to the manager application, I would like to discuss what exactly this platform is all about and how you guys can, use this platform at in your organization, and you can make your organization, workspace more streamlined, more structured. So basically, the manager is a project management and NGO management platform. It's a CSR initiative of Vodafone Idea Foundation. So our organization, NASCOM Foundation, we are working with closely working with Vodafone Idea Foundation, and we have one program that is Connect for Good. So it's a program that we run in partnership with Vodafone Idea Foundation. So basically, the objective is to help the NGOs in terms of providing them with a solution. So we have different solution. For education, we have structure, and from NGO management, we have the manager. So now, if I talk about in any organization setup, no matter it's a small, medium, or large, they are like project. Jyoti, can you? Yeah. So there are like different departments like project team, finance team, management team, auditor and compliance. You will find that each department and team that they struggle with their own sets of challenges. For example, project team, I will discuss only one because we are running short. So project team, struggle in terms of when will be the invoice cleared. What are the documents that are required, but like what should they communicate with their donors, what is the position of the fund against your each project and program. So these are the challenges we will find at the project level, finance level, management level, and the compliance and the audit level. Yeah, Jyoti, next slide please. So as a result of this, you will find that there is no real-time project monitoring system. Number one is the most the challenging situation for every organization. Fund tracking mechanism mechanism is there, but it's a manual fund tracking mechanism. Scattered nature of document. When many a times, document dates are not synchronized. Team utilization chart missing, and senior management they are unable to monitor their project process fund related information, the beneficiaries related information, that how much they have achieved, what was the target. So these are the challenges you will find. As a result of this, there is the monotonous, and the stagnant growth of an organization. So we thought that Jyoti, next slide, please. We thought like we can create a platform where an organization and NGO can manage their different activities. It means like donor management, program management, project management, where they can check the project completion status, that out of 100% how much they have achieved, what is the progress of their fund, what is the utilized, how much they receive from the donor. They can also intervene in terms of task management activities. They can review their fund grant management functionality. There is this function called document repository where one can find all the documents. So the manager platform, the next slide only. So the manager platform will provide you with a different functions. So by and large, I figured out the broader functions, like you can monitor your current process expected fund in a real time manner. You can track all your project activities starting from its inception to its maturity stage. There is this data analytics that will help you in report generation. There is this customized dashboard. At some extent, you can customize this platform and you can modify according to your organization need. There is this notification mechanism, and there is this beneficiary chart reporting module and numbers of things. So yeah. Yeah. Now, what will be the process that how you guys can use this platform? So I am taking you to the quick step by step guide, and Jyoti will share the app link in the chat box section. If you can share, Jyoti, that would be great. So that
Yeah, I have put it in the chat.
yeah, great. Next slide, please. So first thing that you have to what you have to do, you have to click on sign up process, because if you are registering for the first time, then the sign up, and then you have to first register your organization. Next slide, please. You can quickly jump to the slides where you have to put your NGO details, and after registering, you will get the confirmation from the manager team that thank you for your interest. And after that's the step 3, confirmation email will be sent to your registered email address. And next, in the next step 4, on your registered email address, you will find that the process for completing the second part, that you have to verify your organization, and the second process is the organization details section. Next step. Yeah, next slide, please. Where you have to fill the basic detail about your organization, number, contact, and PAN number, GST number, city, country. There are 2 mandatory documents because this platform is exclusively for non-for-profit. So we are asking for 2 documents, that is MOA, trust deed, and incorporation certificate. So you have to upload this document. And after next slide, please. After completing the registration process, you will get this in pop-up that your NGO is successfully registered. Next slide, please, Jyoti. Then there is the registration process that will takes place. I think it's 1 or 2 week, where we will check all the documents, and after that we will provide you the give you the approval. And also we will provide you with a kind of a handhold support, where we will provide you with the orientation as well as a demo session. These sessions, there is no charge for these sessions. So first you have to complete the registration process, sign up, and then I will separately take you to the manager discussion and demo session in detail. So yeah, it's a very quickly. That's all from my end, and thank you so much, Jyoti, for helping me out and sharing
There
this
are a couple of questions for the manager thing, which I will park it to you so that you can answer those
Yeah,
questions
sure.
to these NGOs. Over to you, Mahindra.
Well, thanks,
Yeah,
Akshim,
please.
for that. Yeah,
Um, yeah, you can either share these questions to me directly, or I will respond them like individually because we are running. Yes, definitely, we can connect on call, and Jyoti will share you the detailed description about the manager after this session, and we'll have a one-on-one discussion about this. No issues. Thank you. So I am just giving this to Mahendra, and yeah.
thanks, Akshim, for that quick demo. I'm hoping that the NGOs will start to utilize the manager. Well, I think this is just to conclude the webinar session. I hope all of the NGOs have benefited with this cybersecurity webinar, at least from an understanding of what is cybersecurity all about, what are the threats which a nonprofit can have, and how some of them can also be avoided, right? So I know we were running short of time. Unfortunately, we could not take all the questions, but I would ask the team NGOs to go ahead and send an email to BigTech at NASCOM Found. Jyoti will post the email ID in the chat box, and just subject that as cybersecurity webinar, so that we kind of segregate that. And what we will do is we will consolidate all these questions. We'll go back to Aditya. We'll get some responses for you, right? So that you get those answers for whatever the concerns or what are the areas where you need help, right? So please send the email to the ID which Jyoti will be posting in the chat box, and we will be happy to address any questions going forward. And I also know some of them were also asking for the deck and everything, but what we'll also do is for the registered users, we can follow up with some links, and what Aditya mentioned with some of the details which he mentioned of some organizations will also be sent across, so that you will get that handy and you can refer whenever it's convenient for you guys. With that, thanks a lot, Aditya, Saksham, for having this webinar and talking about the cybersecurity and the manager. And Jyoti, thank you for organizing and moderating the session. And thank you for all the participants who have joined. And it was really great to kind of have you guys, everyone, in this webinar. Thanks for your time, and signing off for today.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.